Welcome back to Bargirl Baddies. Today's story is different from our usual tales of romance gone wrong and bargirl scams. This is about something that's happening right now across Thailand, something that's tearing apart the lives of elderly expats who've called this country home for 10, 20, even 30 years. This is about visa rule changes that are forcing retirees in their 70s and 80s to uproot their entire lives with nowhere to go. His name is Graham Mitchell. He's 72 years old, from Brisbane, Australia, and he's lived in Thailand longer than some of the immigration officers who just denied his visa extension have been alive. He built a life here. He buried his wife here. His friends are here. His routines, his doctors, the street vendors who know his coffee order, the temple where he meditates every morning. And now, because of new financial requirements he can't meet on his pension, the Thai government is telling him he has 60 days to leave or face deportation. This isn't about a guy who came here for cheap beer and easy women. This is about a man who loved Thailand enough to make it his forever home, who contributed to communities, who never caused trouble, who just wanted to live out his remaining years in peace. And he's not alone. Across the country, hundreds of elderly expats are getting the same news. Your visa is denied. Your extension is rejected. Time to go. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, especially if you're an expat in Thailand or planning to retire abroad. Hit that like button if you think these visa changes are cruel, and subscribe because this story needs to be heard. The Thai government might not be listening, but we are. My name is Graham Mitchell, and I never thought I'd be writing this at 72 years old. Never thought I'd be the kind of person whose life gets turned upside down by bureaucracy and policy changes and rules that make perfect sense on paper but destroy actual human beings in practice. But here we are. Here I am. And if my story can warn even one person about the reality of retiring abroad, about trusting too much in a country that will never truly be yours, then maybe it's worth telling. I was born in Brisbane in 1953, right in the middle of that post-war baby boom, when Australia was building itself into something modern and hopeful. My father worked for the railways, my mother was a school secretary, and we lived in a modest weatherboard house in Annerley that my parents bought for £7,000 and thought they'd overpaid. I went to state schools, played rugby league badly, got decent marks, and ended up at Queensland University studying civil engineering because I was good at maths, and my careers counsellor said engineers always found work. He was right about that. I graduated in 1975 and got hired by the Queensland Government's Department of Main Roads, which later became Transport and Main Roads, and I spent the next 38 years designing bridges and highway interchanges and drainage systems. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody grows up dreaming of calculating load-bearing capacities or reviewing environmental impact statements. But it was steady, it paid well enough, and I genuinely believed I was contributing something useful to the state. I met Anne in 1977 at a friend's backyard barbecue in Camp Hill. She was a primary school teacher, 2 years younger than me, with dark curly hair and this laugh that made everyone around her want to laugh too. We dated for 18 months, got engaged, married in 1979 at St. Stephen's Cathedral with a reception at the Breakfast Creek Hotel. Did everything the conventional way, because that's what you did back then. Bought a house in Carina, had our first daughter Rebecca in 1981, second daughter Sarah in 1984, and settled into the kind of comfortable middle-class life that was still possible for regular working people in Australia before everything got so bloody expensive. The years went by, the way years do when you're busy living them. Kids growing up, school concerts and weekend sports, family holidays to the Gold Coast or up to the Sunshine Coast, the occasional trip to Sydney or Melbourne for something special. Anne kept teaching part-time while the girls were young, went back full-time once they were both in high school. We paid off the mortgage by the time I was 45, saved money in superannuation. Did everything right according to the plan everyone said would lead to a secure retirement. The girls grew up and moved out. Rebecca became a nurse. Married a bloke named David who worked in logistics, had 2 kids. Sarah went into marketing, married Tom who was an electrician, had 2 kids as well. By 2009, Anne and I were empty nesters in our mid-50s, looking forward to retirement travel and being doting grandparents and all the things you're supposed to do when the hard work of raising children is finally done. That's when Anne started forgetting things. Little things at first. Where she'd put her car keys, what she'd gone to the shops to buy, names of people she'd known for years. I thought it was just stress from work, maybe early menopause, nothing to worry about. But it got worse. She'd forget conversations we'd had the day before, get confused about what day it was, struggle to follow the plot of television shows she used to love. The diagnosis came in late 2009. Early onset Alzheimer's disease. She was 56 years old. The neurologist explained it gently but firmly. There was no cure, no way to stop the progression, just medications that might slow it down slightly. We had maybe 5 to 7 years before she'd need full-time care. Maybe 10 if we were lucky. I remember sitting in the car park outside the medical centre afterwards and crying in the passenger seat and thinking this can't be real. This doesn't happen to people like us. We did everything right. The next 4 years were the hardest of my life. I kept working because we needed the income and the health insurance, but I was also Anne's primary carer. The girls helped when they could, but they had young children and their own lives. Anne deteriorated faster than the doctors predicted. By 2011, she didn't recognise the grandchildren. By 2012, she sometimes didn't recognise me. By 2030, she was in a care facility because I physically couldn't manage her at home anymore, and I'd visit her every day after work and sit with her even though she had no idea who I was. She died in August 2013 from pneumonia, a common end for Alzheimer's patients. She was 60 years old. We'd been married 34 years. The funeral was well attended, lots of her former teaching colleagues, parents of students she'd taught, our extended family. Everyone said the right things about how she was at peace now, how it was a blessing she wasn't suffering anymore. They meant well, but all I felt was empty. I went back to work after 2 weeks because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt wrong without her. Too quiet, too full of memories, too much of everything that used to be and wasn't anymore. The girls worried about me, kept inviting me over for family dinners, but sitting around their tables with their happy, intact families just reminded me of what I'd lost. I wasn't depressed exactly, just hollowed out, going through motions, waiting for retirement, because at least then I wouldn't have to pretend to care about highway projects and budget allocations. I retired in March 2014, 2 months after my 61st birthday. Could have worked longer, but I qualified for my full superannuation and I just wanted out. The farewell party at work was nice. Everyone chipped in for a decent watch and a card signed by half the department, but I barely remember it. What I remember is walking out of that office building for the last time and thinking, now what? What do I do with the rest of my life? The house was paid off, no mortgage. My superannuation paid out about 45,000 Australian dollars per year, and I'd start getting the age pension in a few years, which would add another 15,000 or so. Comfortable enough by Australian standards, not wealthy, but not struggling. The problem wasn't money. The problem was that I had maybe 20 or 25 years left if I was lucky with my health, and I had absolutely no idea how to fill them. Rebecca and Sarah both suggested I travel, get out of Brisbane for a while, see something different, clear my head. Sarah's father-in-law had done a cruise around the Pacific Islands after his wife died and said it helped. Rebecca thought I should go to Europe, visit Scotland, where my father's family had come from, do the tourist thing. I wasn't sure about any of it, but staying in Brisbane felt suffocating. That's when I remembered Doug Pearson. We'd worked together in the 90s, both senior engineers on the Gateway Bridge duplication project. Spent countless hours in site meetings and design reviews. Doug had retired in 2008 and moved to Thailand, something I'd thought was a bit strange at the time, but he'd kept in touch through Christmas cards and the occasional email, always saying how much he loved it there, how cheap it was, how his pension went 3 times as far as it would in Australia. I sent Doug an email in September 2014, asked if his offer of visiting was still open. He responded within a day, said, absolutely, come up for a few weeks, stay with him and his Thai girlfriend in Chiang Mai, see what I thought. So I booked a ticket for November, 2 weeks, figured I'd either like it or I wouldn't, and at least it would be different from sitting in my empty house in Brisbane. The flight from Brisbane to Bangkok was about 9 hours, then a short connection to Chiang Mai. I'd never been to Asia before, never had much interest in it, honestly. My holidays with Anne had been beach resorts in Queensland or maybe New Zealand, but stepping off the plane in Chiang Mai, walking out into the arrivals area with that thick, humid heat hitting me, the smell of street food and incense, and something floral I couldn't identify, the chaos of taxi touts and tour operators calling out in accented English, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. I felt awake. Doug picked me up in his old Toyota, grinning like a mad bastard, looking tanned and relaxed in a way I'd never seen him in Brisbane. His girlfriend Noi was with him, a Thai woman in her early 50s, friendly and smiley, spoke decent English. They drove me through the city, which was smaller and quieter than I'd expected. Motorbikes everywhere, temples with golden spires rising above shophouses, mountains visible in the distance through the haze. Doug's house was in a neighborhood called San Sai, about 20 minutes north of the old city. Not fancy, just a small 2-bedroom Thai-style house with a little garden, but it was clean and comfortable and cost him 12,000 baht per month, which he told me was about 400 Australian dollars. I'd been paying over 400 per week just for rates and utilities on my house in Brisbane. Those 2 weeks changed everything. Doug showed me around Chiang Mai, introduced me to his expat friends, most of them retirees from Australia or the UK or New Zealand, all living on pensions that would have been tight back home, but here allowed for a genuinely comfortable life. We'd have coffee at cafes that cost 50 baht, eat lunch at local restaurants for 80 baht, dinner with drinks for maybe 200. Doug's monthly expenses, including rent, food, utilities, health insurance, everything, came to about 40,000 baht. That was around 1,500 Australian dollars. My expenses in Brisbane had been over 4,000 per month. But it wasn't just about the money, though that certainly mattered. It was the pace of life, the warmth of the people, the fact that I could walk down the street and vendors would smile and say hello even though I was obviously a foreigner. It was the temples where you could sit in peaceful silence, the night markets full of life and colour, the mountains I could see from Doug's balcony. It was waking up to sunshine and warmth instead of Brisbane's grey winter mornings that always reminded me of sitting in hospital rooms with Anne. I asked Doug about visas, about the process of actually living here long term. He explained the retirement visa, which was straightforward enough if you were over 50 and could prove financial stability. You needed either 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account or proof of monthly income of 65,000 baht, which was about 2,000 Australian. My pension was 45,000 Australian per year, which converted to about 90,000 baht per month. Easy. You got a health check, submitted your documents, paid a fee of about 2,000 baht, and you were approved for a year. Then you just renewed annually. Doug had been doing it for 6 years without any problems. I flew back to Brisbane in late November with a decision already half made. Within 2 months I'd made it official. Told the girls I was moving to Thailand, not permanently, but for an extended period just to try it out. They were worried, thought I was running away from grief, making impulsive decisions. Maybe they were right, but staying in Brisbane felt like drowning slowly, and Thailand felt like air. I arrived back in Chiang Mai in February 2015 with 2 large suitcases and a retirement visa approved through the Thai embassy in Canberra. The process had been remarkably simple. Health check from my GP in Brisbane, bank statement showing my pension income, passport photos, application form. Approved within 2 weeks. I rented a small house in Mei Rim, a quieter area north of the city, 2 bedrooms, little garden, 15,000 baht per month. Bought a cheap motorbike to get around, opened a bank account at Bangkok Bank, started building a life. The first year was an adjustment period, learning to navigate daily life in a different language and culture. But the expat community in Chiang Mai was welcoming and helpful. I joined a retired expat social group that met for coffee twice a week at a cafe in Nimmenhamen, made friends with other Australians, a few Brits, an American bloke named Larry who'd been a high school principal in Oregon. None of us were wealthy, just regular working people whose pensions happened to go further in Thailand than they did back home. I started volunteering at a local school, teaching conversational English 2 mornings per week. The kids were sweet, eager to practice, and it gave me a sense of purpose I'd been missing. I donated to temple restoration projects, attended local festivals, learned enough Thai to handle markets and restaurants and basic conversations. My health was good, just the usual blood pressure medication and annual checkups. Found doctors I trusted at Chiang Mai Ram Hospital, dentists, got into a routine of regular maintenance. The visa renewals were simple. Every March, I'd go to the immigration office with my passport, bank statements showing the required balance or income, health certificate from a local clinic, passport photos, and the 2,000 baht fee. The officer would check my documents, stamp my passport, hand it back with a smile. See you next year. No drama, no complications, just routine bureaucracy. I visited Australia twice a year to see Rebecca and Sarah and the grandkids, usually around Christmas and again in the Australian winter. But Thailand was home. I'd video call the grandchildren, send them birthday gifts, stay connected. But my daily life, my friends, my routines, they were all here. The morning meditation at Wat Phra Singh, coffee at the same cafe on Ratchadamnoin Road, where the owner knew I took it black with 1 sugar, lunch at the market where the papaya salad lady would make mine extra spicy without asking, afternoon reading in my garden, evening walks around Hui Tung Tao Lake. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic, just peaceful. And after the years of watching Anne disappear, after the exhausting grief and the hollow feeling of the house in Brisbane, peace was everything I needed. By 2020, I'd been in Thailand for 5 years and had stopped thinking of myself as temporary. This was home. By 2023, 8 years in, I'd started making long-term plans. Where did I want my ashes scattered when the time came? Probably some at Wat Phra Singh where I'd spent so many quiet mornings, maybe some back in Brisbane with Anne. I'd updated my will, made sure the girls knew where all my documents were, set up my superannuation to continue paying to my Thai bank account for as long as I was alive. I assumed I'd die here, peacefully, hopefully, in my sleep. In my little house, with the garden where the geckos lived in the eaves, and the neighbours' cats came to visit every afternoon. I'd had a good life, made my peace with losing Anne, found a way to live out my remaining years with dignity and purpose, and enough money to be comfortable. Thailand had given me that. I loved this country for giving me that. I had absolutely no idea that in 2025, everything I'd built would be taken away by a policy change. I couldn't fight, and financial requirements I couldn't meet. I had no idea that at 72 years old, I'd be forced to choose between poverty in Australia and a legal overstay in Thailand. I had no idea that all those years of being a good neighbour, respecting local culture, contributing to communities, would count for absolutely nothing when the rules changed. If I'd known, would I have made different choices? I don't know. Maybe. But probably not, because those 10 years in Thailand, even knowing how it ends, were better than the alternative of staying in Brisbane and slowly dying of loneliness in a house full of ghosts. The first hint that something was changing came in March 2024, when I went for my annual visa extension. I'd done this 9 times already, same routine every year, same documents, same process. Show up at immigration with my passport, bank statements proving my pension deposits, health certificate from the clinic down the street, passport photos, the 2,000 baht fee. Usually took about an hour including waiting time. Then I'd have my stamp and wouldn't think about it again for another year. But this time, the immigration officer spent longer looking at my documents than usual. She was younger than the officers I'd dealt with before, maybe early 30s, and she kept flipping back and forth between my bank statements and some document on her computer screen. Finally, she looked up and asked how much exactly was my monthly income. I told her 90,000 baht from my Australian pension and superannuation, same as it had been for 9 years. She asked if it was guaranteed for life. I said yes. Australian government pension doesn't stop unless you die. She asked if I had additional savings beyond the required 800,000 baht in my account. That question threw me a bit. I had about 1.2 million baht in my Bangkok bank account, money I'd saved over the years, plus my emergency fund. I told her yes. Showed her the current balance. She nodded, made some notes, then stamped my passport for another year. But as she handed it back, she said something that I didn't pay enough attention to at the time. She said requirements were under review and I should be prepared for possible changes next year. Make sure to check the website before applying, she said. Rules may be different. I thanked her and left, didn't think much about it honestly. The expat forums and Facebook groups were always full of rumours about visa crackdowns that never materialised. Every few months someone would post that they'd heard immigration was tightening requirements or raising fees or demanding new documents, and it was always either exaggerated or completely false. I'd been hearing these rumours for 9 years and nothing substantial had ever changed, but throughout 2024, the rumours got louder and more specific. People were reporting that immigration offices in different provinces were interpreting requirements differently. Some offices were requiring the full 800,000 baht to be maintained in the account for the entire year, not just at the time of application. Some were demanding notarised letters from embassies confirming pension income. But several embassies, including the Australian embassy, had stopped issuing those letters years ago because they couldn't verify foreign income sources. In the expat coffee group, the older guys started getting nervous. Bill, a British bloke in his mid-70s who'd been here even longer than me, said his mate in Pattaya had been told at his visa renewal that the rules were definitely changing in 2025. Larry the American said he'd read on Thai Visa Forum that the government wanted to attract wealthier retirees and were planning to raise the financial requirements significantly. Doug, who'd been the one to bring me to Thailand in the first place, said his visa agent contact had warned him something big was coming. I tried not to worry. I was meeting the requirements, had been for 9 years. Surely they wouldn't change things so drastically that long-term residents would be affected. Surely there'd be grandfather clauses or transition periods or some kind of accommodation for people who'd already built lives here. That's how reasonable governments operated, right? You didn't just pull the rug out from under elderly people who'd been following the rules for years. In November 2024, the rumours became official policy. The Thai government announced changes to retirement visa requirements effective January 2025. The details were posted on the immigration website and immediately sent shockwaves through every expat community in the country. The old system had allowed 2 methods to qualify. Method 1 was maintaining 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account. Method 2 was proving monthly income of 65,000 baht through embassy letters or bank statements showing regular deposits. Most long-term expats like me used Method 2 because it didn't require keeping a large sum in a Thai bank, earning basically no interest. The new system eliminated Method 2 entirely. Now you had to have 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account, no exceptions, no income method allowed. But it got worse. The money had to be in the account for at least 3 months before your application and had to remain there for at least 3 months after approval. And if you couldn't show an embassy income letter, which most of us couldn't because the embassies had stopped issuing them, some immigration offices were now requiring 3 million baht in the bank instead of 800,000. 3 million baht. I did the conversion in my head, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. Roughly 120,000 Australian dollars. My entire life savings, everything I had in Australia and Thailand combined, wasn't even close to that amount. My superannuation was structured as monthly payments until death. I couldn't access it as a lump sum. My savings in Australia were maybe 30,000, earmarked for emergencies and helping the girls if they needed it. The 1.2 million baht I had in my Thai account would have been plenty under the old 800,000 requirement, but it was nowhere near 3 million. I spent the next hour reading through the official announcement and the discussions in expat forums. The panic was widespread. Hundreds of retirees were in the same situation, had been living here for years on modest pensions, meeting the requirements that existed when they'd moved here, and now suddenly being told those requirements had changed and they didn't qualify anymore. Some people were angry, posting long rants about how this was discrimination against middle-class retirees, how Thailand was only interested in wealthy foreigners now, how this violated the spirit of the retirement visa program. Some were scared, asking if there were any loopholes or alternative visa options or ways to get around the new requirements. Some were already planning to leave, looking at Cambodia or Vietnam or the Philippines, countries with cheaper and easier visa requirements. I went to see Doug the next day. He was in his living room with Noi, both of them looking stressed. Doug had even less in savings than I did, had been living month to month on his pension for years. He'd already contacted a visa agent who said maybe they could help, but it would cost substantial fees, probably 200,000 baht. Plus, he'd still need to show the 3 million in the bank somehow. Doug asked if I could lend him money. I had to tell him I was in the same situation, barely had enough to meet the requirements myself if they enforced the 3 million. Over the next few months, the expat community fractured between those who could meet the new requirements and those who couldn't. The wealthy retirees, the ones with big pensions or investment income or family money, they were fine. Annoyed by the hassle but financially able to comply. The rest of us, the regular working people who'd been getting by comfortably on average pensions, we were scrambling. I made an appointment with the Australian Embassy in Bangkok, took the overnight bus down in January 2025, hoping they could provide some kind of documentation to prove my pension income. The consular officer was sympathetic but firm. They'd stopped issuing income verification letters years ago because they had no way to verify foreign income sources and didn't want the liability. She suggested I contact my superannuation fund and pension office in Australia to get official letters, then have them notarized and translated into Thai. Maybe that would be acceptable to immigration. I spent 2 weeks getting the documents together. Official letters from my super fund and Centrelink confirming my income, notarized by an Australian solicitor. I had to pay $200, sent to me by express post, then translated by a certified translator in Chiang Mai for another 5,000 baht. The whole process cost me almost 15,000 baht, and I had no idea if immigration would even accept the documents. March 2025 arrived. My visa expired on March 15th. I went to immigration on March 10th with my passport, all the documents I'd gathered, my bank statement showing 1.2 million baht, my health certificate, passport photos. I'd barely slept the night before. This wasn't routine anymore. This was my entire life in Thailand, depending on whether some immigration officer would accept my documentation or tell me I had to leave the country I'd called home for 10 years. The officer who reviewed my application wasn't the same woman from last year. This one was older, maybe mid-40s, and she had that bureaucratic efficiency that meant she'd seen hundreds of applications, and yours wasn't special. She looked at my bank statement first, saw the 1.2 million baht, and before I even sat down properly, she was shaking her head. I tried to explain. "I've been here 10 years, I said. Always met the requirements, never caused problems, active in the community, volunteer work, everything. She cut me off. The requirement was now 3 million baht in the bank for anyone who couldn't provide an embassy income letter. I showed her the letters from my Superfund and Centrelink, the notarized translations. She glanced at them, said these were not embassy letters, not acceptable. I asked about the old income method, the 65,000 baht per month I'd been showing for 9 years. She said that method no longer existed, new policy, effective January 1st. I felt my stomach drop. I asked if there were any exceptions for long-term residents, any grandfather clause, any consideration for people who'd built lives here under the old rules. She said no exceptions. Policy from Bangkok. All retirement visa extensions must meet the new financial requirements. I asked what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to go. She said that was not her concern. I could apply for a 60-day extension to settle my affairs, but after that, I needed to leave Thailand or face overstay penalties and potential blacklisting. I sat there in that plastic chair in the immigration office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of instant coffee and paper and bureaucracy, and felt my entire world collapsing. 60 days. 2 months to dismantle a life I'd spent 10 years building. 2 months to figure out where to go and how to survive and what to do with all the things I owned and the people I knew and the routines that had become my existence. I took the 60-day extension, paid the fee, walked out into the Chiang Mai heat, feeling like I was moving through water. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago. The street vendors selling grilled chicken and somtam, the motorbikes weaving through traffic, the mountains in the distance hazy with the burning season smoke. But it all felt different now. Temporary, borrowed, not mine anymore. The next week was a blur of phone calls and emails and desperate research. I called the Australian embassy again. They confirmed there was nothing they could do. I contacted 3 different visa agents. They all said the same thing. Substantial fees, probably 200,000 baht, and I'd still need the 3 million in the bank, or they'd have to use grey area methods that might not work and could get me blacklisted. I looked into other visa options. Elite visa was 600,000 baht for 5 years now. Used to be cheaper, but they'd raised prices too, and even that required proving financial stability I didn't have. Education visa, ridiculous at my age, and they'd cracked down on fake schools. Marriage visa, I was 72 and widowed and not about to marry someone just for a stamp. Volunteer visa, possible, but would require finding an organisation willing to sponsor me, and the rules were murky. I called Rebecca in Brisbane, tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. She was immediately worried, said of course I could come stay with them while I figured things out. But her house was a 3-bedroom in Carindale, her and David in one room, their 2 kids in the other 2. Where would I sleep? The couch? Long term. She was trying to be supportive, but I could hear the stress in her voice. She had her own life, her own family, her own problems. I was 72 years old and about to become a burden on my daughter. I looked up rental prices in Brisbane online. 1-bedroom apartments in decent areas were 350 to 400 Australian per week. That was nearly 18,000 per month, almost my entire pension before food, utilities, healthcare, anything else. The math was brutal. In Thailand, my pension gave me a comfortable life with savings left over. In Australia, it meant poverty. The cheapest option was government housing. But Sarah looked into it for me and said the waiting list was years long. Retirement villages required buying in $200,000 to $500,000 minimum. Aged care was even more expensive. I had about 45,000 Australian in savings back home, maybe another 15,000 worth of baht here. Once that was gone, I'd be completely dependent on my pension, which wasn't enough to survive in modern Brisbane. I met with Doug and some of the other guys from the coffee group who were in the same situation. Bill had already booked a flight back to Manchester, was moving in with his son and daughter-in-law. Larry was looking at Vietnam, heard you could get a year visa there pretty easily. Doug was considering overstaying, just not leaving, hoping they wouldn't enforce it too strictly. But Noi was terrified he'd get arrested and blacklisted and then could never come back. One bloke named Terry, 78 years old, been in Thailand 15 years, said he wasn't leaving. Said he'd rather die here than go back to Perth, where he had nobody and nothing. He was going to overstay until they physically deported him. I understood the impulse even if I couldn't do it myself. At a certain age, starting over stops being an adventure and becomes a nightmare. The cruelty of it wasn't just the policy change itself. It was the complete lack of consideration for human lives. For people who'd followed the rules faithfully for years, who'd contributed to communities, who'd built relationships and routines and reasons to wake up in the morning. We weren't wealthy investors or digital nomads who could pick up and move whenever convenient. We were elderly people on fixed incomes who'd chosen Thailand because it allowed us to live with dignity on what we had. And now we were being told that dignity was only available to those who could prove they had 3 million baht sitting in a bank account. Never mind that we'd been good neighbours and respectful guests and had never been a burden on Thai society. Never mind that we spent our pensions locally, supporting Thai businesses and employing Thai people and paying for Thai services. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was whether we met an arbitrary financial threshold that had changed without warning and without accommodation for those already here. I spent my 60-day extension putting my life into boxes, sold my motorbike, sold most of my furniture, gave away books and clothes to other expats who were staying, said goodbye to the staff at my local coffee shop, at the market, at the temple, the abbot at Wat Phra Singh, who I'd meditated with nearly every morning for 10 years, blessed me and wished me well and said he hoped I'd return someday. I wanted to tell him I wouldn't, that once I left, I'd never be able to afford to come back. But I just smiled and thanked him. My last week in Thailand, I'd barely slept. Just sat in my empty house with the boxes stacked against the walls, listening to the geckos clicking in the ceiling, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. 10 years of peace, of purpose, of feeling like I'd finally found a place where I belonged. Gone because of a policy change, I had no power to fight, and financial requirements I couldn't meet no matter how hard I tried. Rebecca bought me a plane ticket back to Brisbane. I packed my life into 2 suitcases again, just like I'd arrived. Except this time, I wasn't excited. This time, I felt like I was 72 years old, with nowhere to go and no future except dependence and slow decline in a country that had become unaffordable while I was away. I'm writing this from Rebecca's spare room in Carindale. It's technically a study. She and David moved the desk out and put in a single bed for me. The grandkids are curious about Grandpa living here now. Think it's fun, don't understand why I seem sad all the time. Rebecca is doing her best to make me feel welcome, but I can see the strain. An extra person in the house, using the bathroom, eating the food, taking up space. I'm trying to be helpful, trying to contribute, but I'm 72 and exhausted in grieving a life I thought I'd have until I died. I've applied for government housing, been told it'll be at least 2 years. I'm looking for cheap rentals I can afford on my pension, but everything is so expensive now I barely recognise the Brisbane I left. I go for walks around the neighbourhood and everything feels alien. The accents sound strange. The prices make me angry. The weather is cold, even though it's not really cold. I miss the morning heat of Chiang Mai, the smell of street food, the sound of temple bells, the easy rhythm of days that felt purposeful even when nothing special was happening. Doug managed to get another 60-day extension, still trying to figure something out. Bill is miserable in Manchester, emails me saying he's freezing and bored and wishes he'd never left. Terry overstayed and got arrested at hospital when he went in for chest pains. He's being held in immigration detention, waiting for deportation, 78 years old in a cell, because he chose to stay in the country he loved rather than leave for one where he'd have nothing. I don't know what the moral of this story is meant to be. Don't retire abroad. Don't trust that rules will stay the same. Don't build a life somewhere you'll always be a guest. Maybe all of those things. But here's what I know for certain. Thailand gave me 10 years of peace after I lost Anne. 10 years of feeling like my life had purpose and meaning and dignity. And then it took those years back because I didn't have enough money in the bank to prove I deserved to stay. The Thai government doesn't owe me anything. I understand that intellectually. I'm not a citizen. I have no inherent right to live there. But the way this was done, with virtually no warning, no grandfather clauses, no consideration for elderly long-term residents who'd built entire lives around rules that suddenly changed, that reveals something harsh about the transactional nature of being an expat. You're welcome as long as you have money. The moment you don't meet the threshold, you're a problem to be removed. I loved Thailand. I still do. But I trusted too much. I assumed that years of being a good neighbour, of respecting culture, of contributing to communities, would count for something. They don't. I assumed that following the rules faithfully would protect me from sudden changes. It didn't. I assumed I'd found a home. But home is something you own, and I never owned anything in Thailand except the things in my house. The life I thought I built was always just rented, always subject to eviction, always one policy change away from ending. If you're planning to retire abroad, learn from my mistake. Have a backup plan in your passport country. Keep savings beyond the minimum requirements. Don't burn bridges with family and friends back home. Don't assume the rules will stay favourable. And most importantly, understand that no matter how long you live somewhere, no matter how much you love it, if it is not your passport country, then you're always vulnerable to being told to leave. I'm 72 years old, living in my daughter's spare room, trying to figure out how to survive on a pension that's no longer enough in the country I'm from. Thailand was paradise for 10 years. Now it's just a place I used to live. A place I can never afford to return to. A place that's already moving on without me, like I was never there at all. That's the reality of retiring abroad when you're not wealthy. You're always one rule change away from losing everything. And nobody with the power to help you gives a damn, because you were never really one of them in the first place.